Oh.
So, this is
Okay,
structure here.
now you're fastened to.
Right, so now once you couldn't move it all around because there's a cable that runs through here. So now the cable's loose, you get it positioned, and okay, this is where I want to be. You tighten this up, and I mean, now you're there.
That's really clever.
Yeah.
Interesting. So what is causing that to...
So there's nested shells like this that are stacked up, and there's a cable that runs through them. So the shells kind of slide on each other, but then once you tighten the cable, now they clamp each other and hold it in place. So, I mean, you can slip this if you really put in a lot of force, but most of the time you're not really having to put that kind of force in when you're working.
This is a lot to know and to have to master instinctively. So you don't really have to think, isn't it?
And to know, okay, I get there.
These are astronaut flip-flops, right?
It is.
That's a boot.
This is what you wear when you're prancing around inside the space station, is your flip-flops.
That's the little insert.
Yeah, actually that goes in your boot, because that's a good thing. If you're in the spacesuit and you have a lot of room inside your boot.
So this goes back in here?
Yep. So like when you go to move your foot into that foot restraint, if you have too much slop inside the boot,
It's like a ski boot.
your foot moves all around, but your
Right.
boot's not going anywhere.
Yeah, so it's
we
like a
try to
ski boot. You
take up
got to
the
have it
room.
fitted.
Yeah, it's the way to size it, so
Properly.
we don't size
Yep.
every
These
single
things are kind of a balance too. It's nice to have your foot secure, but they're kind of miserable to get into because a lot of times your foot gets on top of it, and you're like, something's stuck in
Yeah.
here, and you can take the boot off and mess
Then you're
around with it.
just
So
exhausted.
it's
Yeah.
It's like scuba diving. You're worn out before you ever get off
You
the
get in
boat.
water,
Right.
You
I know, exactly.
when you get in the water.
Oh, yeah.
Now, one interesting thing for you, since you noted the safer, sound like you know what the safer is, right? Well, one interesting thing we found just in the past few years is they started looking at, we carry a pretty significant amount of weight sometimes on the VRT on the side. You'll see, you go back in your study, you'll see footage where these guys will have some big stuff on the side of them. Sometimes we'll have, we call it ORU, you heard the terms, on orbit replaceable unit.
Yes.
Close enough.
One of our big
Whole
boxes.
component that
Yeah,
you're
like a whole
attaching that
component.
with.
Yeah.
So you're like Superman.
Now, what
Right.
we found out is Safer is built to control this. And you're a pilot too, right? You have a pilot background? Well, the CG is important, right? Safer's built to control this suit, even though as heavy as it is. You add a big mass out here on the side. We tried it in our simulator, and only one crew member could fly himself back with stuff attached.
Wow.
The Safer burns out its fuel real quick.
not only that, but it would
That's
do
important to
really
know.
strange things like you would put an input to move to the right and it would move you to the left. I mean, it was,
Because your CG is
Can't
off.
adjust
Yeah.
to that mass. So now we have a procedure to where if we do get off structure, it's up to our team to realize and help the crew remember they've got stuff attached to them. The first thing you need to do is jettison that and then deploy the Safer, because you don't want to deploy Safer and now it gets in a funky, and it's only got a limited amount of gas to get you back to where you're supposed to go anyway. So you could easily burn out the whole gas.
It's nothing like George Clooney in Gravity. I mean, you better get it right, the initial times, because
We
you
have
don't
a-
get
And
to
if
fly
you
around like
overshoot,
that.
and you better hit the toggle the right way.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. You-
I mean, seriously, because you got, it's like with a drone, you better know
Yeah.
which way you're moving.
The little
it,
joystick, right?
We do
Rotating
a,
or translating. Or, yeah.
we can't simulate the Safer in the pool or anything, so we actually have a VR system we put the crew in, and that's what we do. Is we throw them off structure to put a certain rotation rate to them. They deploy the Safer, hit a button on it. There's a stabilization button that essentially just stops you from spinning. But then you got to figure out your next move, like point yourself at the station. They always teach you to point at a distance further ahead, because now you and the station are moving. And guaranteed, if you point the back of the station, by the time you get there, you're going to be
Well, because you
past
go
the station.
over 17,000 miles an
Yes.
hour,
Right.
aren't you?
Yeah.
Well, it's all vector math, right? So what you really want, you get kicked off, and once you stop, the goal is to point exactly where you came off at, because if you can fly back to that point, all the vector math cancels out, right? So the goal is to point at that spot and then to only hit,
Right, don't
plus
try
X, straight
It's
ahead.
not a moving target anymore.
Right,
You're
just hit straight
You
ahead.
got it in your sights.
Yeah.
It's not that easy,
Start
but
with
yeah.
other inputs, you really complicate it. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, all the different things that's trained a crew for.
Yeah, you should have. If you haven't flown that yet in the VR lab, you should make them
Yeah, we should
let you do that while you're here.
Sure.
That's easy.
We'd love, are
to
you
do.
planning on coming? We'd love to have you come down for an actual EVA. We canceled out. on the
Yes, I'll
time,
come to
but
the next one.
we've
Oh,
got
yeah,
one
that'd be great.
Probably February. We haven't landed on a date yet, but then we're probably going to have some more in March.
Well, you know what? This is really special, because I wouldn't get to see all this
No,
if you were
you would
doing
not.
this
This
today.
room is
Yeah, we
off
would
limits.
probably wouldn't let
This
you
is
in here for that.
amazing.
Yeah.
I had no. I mean, this is incredible to get to actually
Yeah.
see how this all works.
Especially in one place. We usually don't have all this hardware in one area to see all the mock-ups
Yeah.
of the Lee and all that, and then all the tools here and all that. It worked out perfect. So.
We have the best jobs because we get to play with toys.
I know.
Right. You get to play with hardware, space hardware.
And speaking of, if you want to take a break from here, we can always come back up here if you got other questions. Zeb Scoville is the flight director today.
Oh,
He's actually
awesome.
an old EVA officer for us, so the team knows him really well. I went down and talked to him. He said, we can get you back to the EVA console so you get a feel for where the EVA officer sits.
Cool.
He'd prefer not to film in that room
Okay.
because there's the film recording because we didn't pre-record it. Now, there is a viewing room behind it that we allow filming in from the public and everything else, so that's fine back there, but just not down in the front room. Since we didn't coordinate with Royce and everything to have anybody in the front room, they were
okay.
scared it would.
Still sit console since he wasn't doing EVA.
He was supposed to be doing EVA today, but he's still on console doing the kind of the cleanup from it. and other
He's on the
stuff.
schedule.
Yeah. But so yeah, I told him, I said maybe if you guys want to go down to sit with him down there, we'll stay in the viewing room with the rest of the team. So we'll go down there for a few minutes. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here's you talk about high tech, low tech. So we have 4 suits on orbit. This is kind of how we keep track of the sizing. So all those pieces with the numbers, each one of those pieces is a piece we could swap out on the suit. So if you want to make your arm shorter, you can change that out. If you want to make a leg shorter, boot shorter.
And everybody's fitted a little bit differently, I guess.
Right. It's quite complicated.
What's funny is we try really hard on the ground to get them fitted exactly right, but you change a little bit on orbit. Not change over time.
You
get a
grow
little taller,
usually,
actually, the fluids in your back grow you. But what was interesting this time, and I haven't even talked to these guys about it, we did OFV, which is on-orbit fit verification,
Yes.
that's where we put on the suits again to make sure everybody's fit right. Well, we had to make pretty significant changes to our Japanese crew member, right, this time?
Yeah, a lot of that was his preference, but
Okay.
but he grew a little bit more.
So we'll
than
probably-
they
Is this the one who
expected, and
tweeted something about growing and everybody said, you didn't grow that much,
He
did you?"
did, and it turned out he didn't, right?
know,
But
I
yeah,
remember
it wasn't some weird thing going on there.
So,
That's
but
some
did they
old
go
DB
back to
running
their
around.
regular height
Yep.
when they come back down?
The 1G kind of
It's just because
compresses
we
your back.
the
Yeah.
gravity
Compresses
compresses.
Yeah.
discs.
Yeah, I'm much taller in space.
I was gonna say,
There you go.
Yeah, I think
could've been a
Scott
model in
Kelly. I think Scott
space.
Kelly said that
Yeah.
too. Yeah, he's like, unfortunately,
That's one of those things
back
we'll
down.
debrief on the ground, say everything we could have caught beforehand to see that. But a lot of it's just crew preference on orbit. Once they get up there, they'll change things around. We'll have them change gloves
Once they're sitting in the suit in zero gravity and kind of
Feel it,
balanced
yeah.
inside of it instead of gravity pulling them down the way it does
Right.
for all their training out here. So they may find that they
Yeah.
fit in the suit just a little bit differently. And
That would make sense.
The other thing this reminds me of is, one of the things that we have to deal with on a regular basis. It's not as glamorous as stowage. So, hey, go get this component. We need you to change your arm out. Where is it? There's bags everywhere full of stuff. And so the crew's like, hey, I looked here. It's not there. And it's like, well, maybe the last person didn't put it in the right place. I don't know where it is.
Right.
It's still our job to try to figure out where it is and get them to it.
Yeah.
So.
However many hundreds of bags that are all white and
Yeah.
just identifiable by a serial number.
Would it ever be, as maybe reasons you can't to ever chip any of this stuff with a scanner so you can find
That,
it?
yes.
we're
actually.
trying to get
little
there.
a lot of the
RFID
internal
radio.
hardware
RFID.
actually is, and they have little scanners. But a lot of our hardware, either the tags can't survive going out in space, or they would come off because of the environment, or they would mess up the function of the equipment. And so
Well, that's it.
hardware
You
doesn't
don't know
have
what
any,
it's going to do because it's a
any
little
stuff,
radio
so-
frequency thing,
We're
right?
going through a process right now of getting the panel that they configure to go outside. It goes to vacuum with the crew members. That's what the switches they flip to turn on and off oxygen and then power and all that. We're trying to get a switch label because the crews had trouble understanding it's right near another switch. Just getting that label made because it has to be approved to go out and vacuum the space and all that kind of stuff. So it's not just you can't just
Sure.
add something
Yeah.
to it on the fly.
It's like why the planes still have ashtrays on them.
Yeah.
It's easier to leave the ashtray than get the FAA to
It
change
is.
it.
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's true.
get it.
And especially inside the suit, like you see the HUDs and all this stuff on the science fiction suits. Well, that's a pure oxygen environment. So that is so hard to get anything with a battery. Oh my gosh,
Well, sure.
years of testing and making sure
Oh,
that it's
gosh,
safe. Because
yeah.
you could easily. We've had a suit one time. There's a great picture we
Very
posed
beginning of-
where a suit, luckily unmanned, caught on fire, and the damage it did to it like that was amazing. So that really scared everybody, and we got to be serious about this.
That was at high pressure oxygen.
Yeah.
The emergency oxygen is very high pressure.
Yeah.
It's 6,000 psi versus 1,000.
You really are in
PSI.
living in a little spacecraft then.
Oh,
You
Yes.
can pull one just like a regular one.
Oh,
Yeah,
we do everything to make sure that doesn't happen. But yes.
We do a spacewalk. We got 3 spacecrafts after. We got the 2 crew and the big station. So we had to treat it like that. So that's what's kind of neat about our job. We probably have some. Selfishly, I think we have more responsibility in some of the front room positions because we got a couple of crew members' lives in our hands in a separate spacecraft. Most of the time, the other position in the front room are doing something inside the spacecraft, where the flight director has more oversight over that.
Well, it's actually even a bigger responsibility than that. You wouldn't think it could be bigger than human life, but it's also what that would do to everybody.
Absolutely.
If something happens up there,
Yeah.
Absolutely.
it's the whole. I mean, it's like 9/11 or something. Everybody's watching a terrible catastrophe. We don't
It's
want
like
that to happen.
Challenger or Columbia. I mean, it's very, very hard on the flight controllers because you're trained. I mean, like I said, I used to do flight dynamics, and both you know, I was just here at the very start of Challenger, but for Columbia, you know, I used to do entries, and you are trained to fix situations. You are trained when something goes wrong to get that crew down to the ground, and when you can't,
There just was no way.
Yeah,
that
that's
that
but
could've-
it's very hard on you. You're like, it was my job to get them
But
home
if
safe.
you